Hello and welcome to another episode of Digitals in a Cruel World, brought to you by the Digital Disruptors. We cover all things wise and wonderful in the accounting tech world to help you cut through the messy middle and the noise of the busy app and these days AI marketplace and figure out whether the tech is truly a good fit for your practice or firm. Today, we're going to be focusing on a handful of recent news items, those that are probably in your face a little bit more these days. So we've heard Perplexity AI is going after accounting. We're hearing some updates from Oracle around Fusion Finance, and we've seen a few movers and shakers in the marketplace. We've seen some things from Briefcase One, from Mayday, and also some news from GoCardless, who seems to be axing jobs after its acquisition to Molly. So I guess we could have predicted some of that, but I'll be joined this week by the lovely Billie and Kevin from Employment Hero. I was about to say Kevin from Fitzgerald. That would be wrong. Kevin of the Fitzgerald crew. Kevin, tell us how you're doing and how's your week going?
Yeah, good. Sorry, I live under a flight path here, so I just closed the window. You could probably hear that, but yeah, good to be back. Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to have you back on. And this is a second episode for you and a second episode for Billie as well. My fave, Friday AI. How do you like to say it?
Friday AI. Friday
AI.
But everybody kind of gives it their own twist. It's the beauty of it.
Yeah. I feel very excited to see you, and I'm actually really happy that we're able to help you with your problem just before we started recording, because Billie was telling us that she has a very unfriendly friend that low level speaks through the microphone. Billie, tell us a little bit.
So I have an electronic ghost in my house, which sounds crazy, but honestly, I've had voices on my recordings. I say it's a she because the woman who used to live here was a woman, and I think she's rang the doorbell, and I've even had her speaking to ChatGPT when I've not been in the room. So yeah, I've seen recording conversation.
Hey, I can handle requests from the other side.
Yeah. I feel like I'm so one with AI now that even my ghosts are getting involved.
Jeez.
You can have people want to come to your house to, speak to the, what do they call it, the departed,
We'll be doing a seance, maybe that can be like a post-accountex party seance at the house.
You could just be like, sis, I hate to trouble you, but would you mind just figuring out the lottery numbers for next week? Because I could really do with a little bit of a bump. What do you think?
Okay, we'll put that out there right now. In fact, we have to just say that Indi did just tell the ghost to leave me alone, and the whispering stopped from him, didn't it, Indi? So if you request the lottery numbers, it might just happen. So we can go split.
Please, could you just help us with the lottery numbers? We'll do something fun for you as well. We'll just, we'll make it all happen. Whatever you want, so you'll just make it happen. If you want me to get a new house, we'll buy her a new mansion. That's fine. Just help us with that. Help us to help you.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll buy a ghost mansion, something for the lot.
Hey guys, have you heard about FreeAgent, the MTD solution that will keep your practice ahead? Prepare your practice and clients to get MTD done with FreeAgent's HMRC recognized MTD solution for sole trader, landlord, and CIS clients. Submit quarterly updates and file final declarations directly to HMRC. Simple digital record keeping with AI-powered technology, bulk actions, and auto submissions that speed up your admin. Manage MTD compliance for landlords at scale with clean ownership splits and property level reporting. And they're not just for freelancers and micro businesses. FreeAgent scales seamlessly to spotlight what matters and streamline admin for all your clients, from startups to well-oiled machines, whether they have 20 employees or 2. Perhaps you've caught them on our latest episodes of the Digitals in a Cruel World. FreeAgent are proud sponsors of the Digital Disruptors, so give them a look up when you get a chance. So we'll kick off with this week with Advancetrack. So Advancetrack are excited to share that the 2026 Accounting Talent Index report will be launched at their conference GBX on the 12th of May at the National Gallery. And the theme for this year is your firm ready for change? So what's actually interesting here is that while everyone's talking about AI replacing accountants, their data seems to be telling a different story. And the upcoming Accounting Talent Index launching at the event shows that 70% of firms say workloads are increasing pressure on senior staff. So the real issue right now seems to be a lack of capacity for those senior staff and not a lack of tools. So very interesting to see what the rest of the report says. And what GBX is actually trying to do is bring together the firm owners, operators, and decision makers to talk about how you scale, how you structure teams, and how you deal with rising client expectations. Plus, also worth noting, all proceeds go to the George Baldock Foundation, which is a nice touch. You can sign up for the event, and we'll post a link in the comment section or description, depending on where you're finding us this week. But yeah, super excited to hear the rest of the report and some of the data back from that.
Yeah, we've rolled out our March jobs report, which is basically, I guess, a culmination of data across all of our clients in the UK. Represents about 120,000 employees. We've seen month on month employment growth at just over 5.3%, which is really positive. But the other side of it is we're seeing wage growth still at around 8.8%, which is obviously quite high and I'd say unsustainable. The reality is people are still finding it really difficult to find talent, like across all sectors and all geos. So the headline's positive from an SME perspective, like they're still hiring, but underneath, I think the market is restructuring in some ways. Full and part-time roles, we're seeing some differences there, moving in opposite directions, with an increase in full-time, a drop in part-time, which I think is linked to the changes with the Employment Rights Bill. But part-time is feeling a bit riskier for SMEs at the moment. They're just trying to understand all the legislation behind it.
Interesting. And how does that differ as well from the previous month's report? So again, just I know that you're kind of tracking it month to month, but this last 6 months to a year has been quite dramatic because every new model release, we seem to see a big ripple effect through the job industry as well.
Yeah, you did. Like I'd probably go back a bit further, maybe even 12, 14 months ago, like when we saw the changes in policies, like and change to NIC. We saw like a pretty drastic hit to the level of employment across our client base. People were really trying to grasp what the legislation meant and then how they would operationalize it, which was difficult. They were also trying to forecast how much the cost of hiring would be with additional taxes, changes. And effectively, we kind of saw a curve, like a complete drop in employment. And then it took 12 months to recover, which started to recover September last year. We saw really good signs across November, December, which was very much seasonal hiring, I would say, part-time roles. But now we're seeing like another kind of hesitation, like and drop because there's been a lot, right? Like come out in April for the, employers and businesses to understand, and still updates coming through. And combine that with the Fair Work Agency and like where their focus is, I think a lot of SMEs are just kind of trepidation again. What do we do next? Why do we need to do it? Who can help me? And to me, I guess our perspective is obviously employment is crucial to run a business, but it really becoming difficult for people to consume and assimilate all the changes.
Yeah. Well, that'll probably bring us on to a story that I know that Billie, you've got to touch on, which is well, good old reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, we've seen as well that there's been reports saying that AI is more likely to affect women in like 3 times more likely to affect women's roles. And I think that kind of goes to that part-time part of the report that you talked about, Kevin. So yeah, talking about AI coming for jobs. Just this morning, I've recorded a demo of this product, Perplexity Computer, which is able to now fill out tax returns. And I'm not just talking about it telling you where to put things or advising you on what to do. It's actually filling out, and it's quite amazing to watch, to be honest. What I would say is this is very much in the US at the moment, but if you are UK based, don't switch off and think it doesn't affect me, because actually it's just kind of what's coming down the path. So they've launched Perplexity Computer. If you've got Perplexity Pro, you can use this. And within that model, it's got something called Prepare My Taxes. You upload the documents and it will fill out the IRS return for you. You can actually see the completed return. Obviously, it doesn't file it, but this is exactly the kind of talent conversations we're going to be having, because as accountants, from my perspective, we have a kind of pre-return duty of like, the year end's coming up, let's do some tax planning. The filling out the form, nobody values. The clients don't value it, we don't value it. So I think this is a really positive move if you frame it like that, and you can see kind of where, as accountants, we're going to sit. As I said, so it fills out the return and then we essentially review it and can do the filing. It even asks questions. So in the example I was working on, it asks things like marital status, which I guess in the UK can make a difference. It might in the UK ask things like, do you claim child benefit? So it is really, really impressive. And they've also launched an extra kind of feature to this where it actually is checking the work as well. So we've seen this in the likes of QuickBooks with their health checks. Perplexity do something similar, and it even picked up an error on someone who's qualified, prepared a return, and it picked up an error where I think there was like a 67% underclaim. So they did actually not claim for 6-7% of this overtime tax. As I said, it's kind of US based here, so the lingos are not really my remit, but it's really interesting to see they've paired with Plaid, which is a tool that can access bank accounts. So the information is there, it's doing the doing. We just need to make sure that we can position ourselves either side of that and make sure we find our value and our place in that world so that we're not getting displaced too much.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, and we've seen you could call it a linked story from Tom Blumfield, who was the former CEO of Monzo. Pretty bold statement. You know, he was talking about the structure of taxes and how they could be collected. And his view is that, I guess the impact of his view is that accountants, income tax providers, service could be wiped out in the next 5 years. And it's really interesting to see this, because it is a structural idea, but it's just more about rather than individuals actually, having an advisor, an accountant to run their tax returns, that the governments would shift and look at data centers and go to where, I guess, the source of truth is, you could call it, and actually tax it that way. Now, that's pretty bold, right? I think it's fair to say, for a government of a well-established nation like the UK that is, would have some baggage, I would say, in the tax system. To actually make a shift like that feels really extreme. We know governments don't change as quickly as, say, us who live in tech world. So I think it's a pretty big statement. But there's also,
I think it's a really well-timed statement as well. We've just launched MTD. The government just put how many billions of pounds of resources into MTD for income tax, and then somebody's come forward and said, "By the way, we don't need to do that in 5 years."
yeah, I think it's a nice idea. No, but maybe if you were starting a country, right, and starting a tax system, you say, actually, this is, maybe a better way to do it. But I think what the statement misses is compromising the fact that the level of tax collection, is obviously hugely material. I think it's 40% of government revenue. Who's going to take that risk, right? To compromise that. Parts of the job are obviously already automated, and we're seeing more and more automate, as you just shared, Billie. But I don't think we're there yet. And even I thought about it, I said, well, in 5 years, what's possible? And that's really hard to answer right now. But I can't see an agent calling up HMRC to deal with disputes. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what does change, but I think something like this feels a bit out there.
And also, I don't think that as a system, as you said, so income tax and in general, that was something that was introduced, was post one of the wars, and they were trying to basically understand how they could try and as a government generate more from services and human labor, rather than, in the past it was always on assets and companies. And now I think when we look at this new world of compute and the idea of even taxing compute, we as a nation don't really have that same sort of attitude. I believe OpenAI pulled back on its project in the UK because we just did not have the ability to have all of the compute power here. So it's continued with its project in Texas and in Denmark and in other regions as well. But in the UK, it's pulled back from its commitment to the site to even getting the right energy pulled out of the system, because we just don't, we're not in the race for that at the moment, which in itself is a worry. But that's why making a statement like that, 5 years, I kind of think it's quite clickbaity, and I just think it's designed to then make the Monzo. Is he the ex-CEO or the current CEO?
I think he's ex, is he? Yeah.
CEO. He's just
Yeah.
trying to be relevant. I'm just going to say
Yeah.
it.
Look,
He's trying
there's
to
a,
be
there's
relevant
a lot
now.
of big statements out there, right? But, you try and wear your practical hat, right? We've all been in positions where we're trying to digitize a business. Imagine trying to digitize the income tax, system of a nation.
I think that just shows a lack of understanding, doesn't it, from Monzo's perspective? Yeah, I think that's exactly the depth that you actually have to go to. They are very much surface level, probably thinking we allow people to categorize in our system. They could categorize it to each of the 9 boxes on the tax return and press submit, and it's done. And it's just that, it's just naive.
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 Agree with you. And I think the to the point that you made, Billie, on Perplexity and keeping an eye on that, I think in particular because Perplexity is a multimodal system, right? It's not its own LLM. So I think for me, it's going back to what we spoke about on this podcast a few weeks back with Alistair Barlow, who was talking about the double subsidy that we're all going into, or marching into the valley of doom of having one system that relies on several, or another system that in effect is loss leading at the moment, and then it's compounding that. So the worry for me is more that this is, why will you pay for another system that has an LLM built into it when you've got also a Perplexity that can handle that challenge, and maybe you're already paying for Perplexity for other things in your job, and then suddenly it's kind of like this double subsidy of technology the whole time. So I think that's my only perspective on that, which is maybe roll that forward in 5 years.
I feel, as an ex-accountant, this just seems to be that constant attack going on at the moment, right? And we heard it before with cloud. I don't think anybody should be complacent with it, because it's an opportunity, obviously, to look at the tools and upscale and equip your business on how to actually take advantage. But this fear mongering just doesn't help anyone.
Exactly. Well, I'll go to something more wholesome then, not fear-mongering at all. Mayday is doubling down on month end and proves that the category isn't going anywhere. So there's a really interesting update where they've kind of done a catch-all for everything that they've done in the quarter, and they've rolled out centralized control of contacts, chart of accounts, and tracking categories across multiple Xero entities. And they've also acquired Easy Month End, which we spoke about previously on this podcast. And it's quite telling, they're doing a lot and it's showing us a lot about where that mid-market Xero ecosystem is heading, because I know while we've spoken about it before, that changes they sound incremental, but they're becoming quite a big deal in terms of where Xero has been a long-standing weakness on multi-entity or group level controls, and Mayday is kind of stepping in as a control layer above the ledger. So I think what we've seen in the past is they've done a lot with education on that in the CFO tech stack. And this last quarter, it seems like they've done a lot to extend that out to businesses, to companies that have multi-entity businesses, so firms that might also appeal to that layer, and they want consistency across all of those entities and control over the structure. They've got the automation tools that are handling the complex accounting tasks, and they've layered it with checklists and reconciliations to coordinate all the teams. So historically, I think that's been something that Xero has lent out from, and they've never really been on the front foot about themselves. But Mayday seems to be doing a lot of that work for Xero. They've expanded quite aggressively into New Zealand, which is Xero's home turf, and they've extended into having a much deeper partnership alignment with them across, several different jurisdictions. And they are also holding a roadshow across all of New Zealand and Australia. So it's really moving up in the value chain that is Xero. I don't want to speculate too hard, but do I detect that there could be an acquisition here that happens at some stage? Because this is a really great synergy, and they are so deeply aligned now with Xero. There's been so much noise that AI will kill off month-end tools, but the updates from Mayday, if you look at what they're doing, it's owning that layer. It's making complex finance more manageable for Xero clients specifically, and it knows where it sits in that layer, and it seems to be doing a lot of the outreach with Xero hand in hand. So if it
I
does
don't know
happen,
I don't know if the poltergeist is reading his tea leaves now, like, but I wouldn't be surprised. David Tuck, who I respect like a lot, like I'd actually first met him when I was with Xero in Australia, and he was with Chaser at the time, and he was dressed up as a knight at the Xero, at XeroCon and Xero roadshows. I've seen the business grow like really well, and even when I was at Xero, which was a long time ago, consolidation, month-end reporting, like multi-entity was a huge ask, and no one's really cracked the back of it yet. So I think he's actually in the right position now to really go after it and solve major pain points, and the growth has come from actually solving those pain points. So it's really cool to see it. Interesting to see what happens next from here.
I guess we're seeing more and more businesses like reach that limit as well within Xero, where they kind of need that extra tool. And I think Mayday have done really well in kind of staying in their lane. They've stuck to what they know, and they've like expanded on that problem and really like drilled down onto that. So Xero, like, yeah, go for it, because it saves us doing it. Indi, I do agree, but I'm not sure. Do they have any money left after the Sift acquisition? Surely not.
I think they've got a few pockets that they've
I think they're
untapped.
doing okay.
Doing all right. I reckon that, if we see it happen this year, you heard it here first. But I definitely thought the same as you, Kevin, which is seeing David come from Chaser, seeing him start something in Mayday, having done a few different, assignments. He did a little bit of a gig with Arex for some time. So seeing his style, getting to know how he is very well networked, and actually this is in his sweet spot. Everything that he's doing with the CFO tech stack and building that out, making that something that people can really get their teeth into and understand, how to evolve their own offering and service their clients better. He's really changed how Xero is positioned in most of the firm's mind. And I think that's just, I don't want to give him too much credit, because I know he's got a great team behind him, but credit to him. So can't wait to see what happens with that.
So talking of Xero as well, the news of their kind of rebrand, I think we're going to call it. So Xero have announced Xero OS. They have positioned this as their kind of AI native operating system. So the OS stands for operating system. Not sure I like that, because I don't know if it's the accounting, but as soon as I see OS, I see outstanding. But hopefully it'll be outstanding operating system. I'm not sure. So the plan is that more of the operating system, it'll become more of an operating system than an accounting platform. So it will be kind of doing more of the tasks rather than kind of this dumb terminal. I think Xero and any of the products could be at risk of doing with this kind of layering that Indi mentioned earlier, along with Alistair Barlow. So this has been framed as Xero's second biggest shift, obviously after the cloud kind of adoption 20 years ago. And they're moving into this intelligent SaaS space. So the plan is that it's going to have AI handling routine tasks. We've all heard of our lovable friend Jax, but what I think is really interesting is this kind of change of position. As Jax, when they were introduced, was introduced very much as an assistant. Now with this Xero OS, we're hearing the term like Xero's AI CFO, because it's supposed to be reconciling transactions, setting up payments, analysing bills that are coming in and being able to report on them. I feel saying this like we've heard it before, but so hopefully we're going to actually see it come to fruition a little bit more now. And they're also saying that this is going to be impacting the entire financial stack. So the accounting aspect, payments, which we've seen obviously Xero go heavy on, payroll, tax, over thousands of connected apps that they've got are all going to be impacted. And because of this, they've said that it's going to, the AI this is going to understand the ledger and therefore not going to be able to hallucinate. So hopefully we're going to be getting really concise responses from this new operating system. And obviously this comes off the back of the announcement last month with the Anthropic partnership. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Is this a rebrand, or is it kind of new packaging? Is this layering AI on top, or is it actually grounding it in the product? It's quite difficult to know because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah. It is really interesting, and we actually rebranded 2 years ago to Employment Hero operating system, right? Like everything employment in one place, and then you can take advantage of the AI tools. So I think it's a really positive move by Xero. Like the power, the depth of data, right? Like in the general ledger is just phenomenal. But it's really where the AI has the capability to be driven by the user to extract insights, tasks, outcomes. Like it's going to be really interesting. So it feels like this piece with larger platforms is becoming table stakes. You've got a high level of high quality data, and now you've got the AI capability layered on top of it. And now it's like, okay, so what's going to happen next? A little bit of a wait and see approach from my perspective, but I think it's a really good move.
Yeah, I agree with you that the move in itself establishes that there is a difference between pre-OS and post-OS. This is, clearly they want to stand for something that says we've got years of enriched accounting data, enriched by accountants, and that, this is something that they've been able to then leverage and start looking not only at, okay, you've got the ledger, you've got the data, you've got the context, and now the AI layer as well. So the only thing that, when you think back to Xero, when it was saying Xero ecosystem, what did you think? You thought ecosystem means it creates some sort of bubble and dome around itself where other things can thrive. Xero operating system says something very different. It says we are operating this system. And so my real, I guess the way that they've made the changes to the API and how they're charging for that, the fact that they have made those conversations clear around the data and the ownership of that data, and now this is very rich decision data that they've had for years and years and years. I think that it's quite clear that there will be room for some amazing players, standout players who perform jobs like Mayday are doing, but maybe not the same ecosystem they had before. And I think that anyone that's sitting on top of that, like Billie, you just said, it's the Anthropic, the Xero, so it's the layers of the tech upon the tech. How many do you want to really extend towards that are sitting further on top of that? So it's more for me, again, this movement away from SaaS. And, we saw Sukhinder saying that's a movement away from SaaS to SaaS or whatever it's going to be. What I kind of see is this is just going to have a compression effect on a lot of the ecosystem that it's had in the past.
I wonder, what you're saying there about when Xero kind of changes charging for API. At the time, one of the reasons I thought was kind of to get rid of some of the naffy kind of apps that were just kind of like tagging along and riding the coattails, and they weren't actually producing much value. But actually, strategically, that could have been a huge move, so that sort of some of those apps that are now much easier to make and create, if they've got that API connection, Xero are blocking them from entering because they're just going to do it themselves. And so then it brings more value to their product as opposed to more value to the partners. And that's where actually it could have been a bit more of a longer, they've been very, very good at being quiet about it, but it's been a much longer process of, there's a bigger picture as to why we've done this API thing.
Yeah. It could be like I think the reality is with the size of the ecosystem now, it could be a couple of thousand, businesses that you could choose from in I think it's still called the App Store. It's kind of that 80-20 rule. Like I think only 20% of them are really, really like well connected. And then the rest like would have, some mutual customers, but I don't think it's huge. So
yeah,
it's going to be, I think it's like, if you think about the capability of AI, like, is there lower level apps that are currently connected that could be just built, as an agent?
Now I think so. Yeah, I think there'll be a continuation for those that have
Deep.
very deep vertical knowledge of something that is difficult for Xero to replicate, in particular because the customers are already within that software. Or there'll be those that are very compliance or like infrastructure critical. So we're talking things that like Xero won't want to get into because it's again, comes with lots more regulation or lots, like that compliance side of things. But I think everyone else, if you're not in that zone, I would say Xero has made, they put the flag down, it says OS on it, and that just means that we operate this system. It's no longer an ecosystem.
Yeah, it's been done before. You think of Apple, right? Like, and taking ownership of everything, and you want to have the Apple connected products. So look, it can't say it's a replica of what's been done before, but we're seeing it in other businesses as well. Like Oracle have announced, and this is a mouthful, Fusion Finance Agentic Applications. And while it's, a lot of the conversation around AI is still the assistive layer, Oracle appears to have gone a level deeper and really looking at like the execution of tasks. We've got a list here. Agents can chase payments, manage collections, handle supply chain disruptions, prioritize finance workflows, and push processes forward without human input. So that is really, really, I guess what we'll see is a lot more of this capability. Like, we have a window into it, obviously, I see into our business and the AI agents that we're building, compared to a typical roadmap maybe 2 years ago, where you're talking about having engineers and product teams doing a lot of work, obviously, and investigation work and getting into beta. Roadmaps are kind of halving, right? Like, in terms of the pace. So spinning up an AI agent in the platform based on customer feedback, I think is going to move to, like, it could be ready in a couple of weeks rather than it's on the roadmap and we might see it by the end of, a 12-month period. So interesting to see where Oracle go with this. The AI is embedded directly into all the workflows, permissions, approval hierarchies. It feels very much like the human still completely drives this, but they have the opportunity to drive a lot faster and harder.
Very interesting. And actually, I think that's quite a nice segue to something that I wanted to ask you about, Kevin, which was, I joined the Dext webinar to hear some of their updates yesterday. And they were talking about some of the agents as well that they've implemented. Some of them were agents around, automatically accepting or recognizing the data that was coming into the system. So the agents had automated several of the I'd say 83% of edits that were coming in based on data that was coming into the bookkeeping automation system. And then on top of that, they started announcing things that they were doing in the pro-commerce side of things. I don't know if that's a replacement of Greenback as a system, but again, there was sophistication around what they were doing there. And on top of that, they went a step further and they started talking about the payroll side of things. So Dext Pay, which was rolled out last year, and we spoke a little bit about how they've done such a great job of rolling this out for suppliers. They're now talking about doing the same for payroll, and in particular looking at payroll payments where you can import, you can API import next, but you can import and then you can make useful remittances and scheduled payments for payroll. And also just in the preparation of that in general. So automating it and then making sure that it's reviewed and paid. Very, very a bucket load there of change. Making very intrigued by the payroll stance change.
Payroll payments I think this is really interesting. We know Bax is rubbish, right? Like, it's just not great. But there's also a very strong view, I'd say, from business owners of the control factor of actually making that payment, like that last mile transaction. There's plenty of businesses out there that plug into payroll platforms where the calculation is made, and then it's almost like a transfer to a wallet, and you've got to manage that wallet, and then you actually disperse the payment from a third party. I saw Dext, I think their volume was up pretty quickly. They're obviously really well respected. To me, and I'll try not to sound too biased, it felt odd that a payroll leader would then move money, and use Dext to make that payroll payment. Where we're headed is payments totally embedded in the platform itself that you're using, and the payroll manager or payroll leader has full control of the process all the way through and doesn't have to leave the system. So you almost have like that trust and control factor in place. But I think the reality is people are trying to get away from Bax, and anything that is better is going to attract quite a lot of attention. So good on them. Yeah, I like it.
Interesting. I like it, like you said, but it was more just, I think we've had that conversation previously about having more of the context data. So even like having a team that understands like the HR implications, and because none of that is really anywhere near Dext. So it's kind of like having no context to any of it. As long as it works fine, there's no changes and it's bread and butter, which as we know in payroll, that's not always the case. It sort of feels like it's a bit removed, but that's just, again, me looking at it from the outside. And then I've got something different now on Briefcase. Briefcase has pushed deeper into the ledger with bank feeds this week. So another update from them because they launched live bank feeds into Briefcase One. It sounded like table stakes to me at first, but as they push more into the ledger zone, the context into what they're building is actually quite significant because once the feed lands, in this case, Briefcase is saying they will extract the merchant, predict which businesses the transaction belongs to, categorize it, assign the tax treatment, and then decide whether to reconcile or cash code all automatically. So, and crucially, if the confidence is high enough, the software will post to the ledger without intervention as well. So I think what this is really about just giving better control over the workflow. Bank feeds have always been the gateway to a stronger, more accurate financial output. I think we've seen that in the past, when we were in the early days of bank feeds and, people used to have that drop out or crap out quite a few times. It was a nightmare. But I think what Briefcase is doing is when they laid out their kind of launch plan for Briefcase One, a full ledger built for MTD at scale, they've now decided to tighten that loop. So it's, from the document to the bank to the ledger to the submission, which is the dream. And I think that grounded takeaway from me is that the market is heading towards a closed loop system that owns the full journey. If you can automate, you can ingest, you can decision, and you can post, then you're not just an assistant anymore to the accountant. You're starting to replace a lot of the process itself. And maybe for that level of like MTD that we're talking about, sort of what's needed. And at some point that play was always going to happen. But I'm keen to get your perspectives on this as, this is fairly new and they seem to be picking up a lot of steam.
Briefcase, it just feels like every single week there's something to talk about in terms of what they're developing, which is amazing. I do think as well, one trend that we're seeing in practice is that there's this like need to kind of tighten up the tech stack. People don't want several tools. So if they can have something, if they're already using Briefcase, the majority of their clients, if they can, I'm not trying to downplay the product here, but if for some of the smaller clients, they want to trial this new bank feed aspect for maybe the less complicated ones before they then move up. If they're already using the product, it doesn't feel like they're trying to adopt anything new. And then with it new to potentially replace some of these ledger products that are getting really expensive for some of those smaller clients now, and the prices are going up and accountants having to have those awkward conversations. So it feels like it's going to tackle quite a few of the issues accountants have got.
Yeah, but look, I lived that journey when bank feeds were released, by Xero, and it had such a huge impact, right? Like, and there's obviously still a lot of improvements. And as you said, that closed loop dream seems to be where Briefcase, could be headed, which is really exciting to see. It's great to see constant development still in the space where kind of people kind of think, oh, we've got bank feeds, like, and it's great. Stop there. But people are actually going after it and saying, actually, we can make this a lot better. So it's one I'm going to have to take away and read a little bit more about.
So on MTD as well, so I know Briefcase, obviously, it's a great time for them to do that. We've also had some news from FreeAgent this week on an MTD release. I love the timing of FreeAgent here because the release that they've done is around kind of managing multiple clients. And I feel like pre-MTD launch at the beginning of the month, people were not thinking in bulk. Like that was the least of their worries. They just needed to get people on. So the fact that FreeAgent have kind of waited to release kind of this bulk feature, I think is really, really smart. So they've now released automated quarterly updates so that you can prepare and submit the quarter updates HMRC automatically. So it's kind of that set and forget type of thing if it's something that is applicable to that client. They've also got automated client approval requests to send those quarterly updates to clients to approve things in bulk rather than having to contact them all one by one. They've also got filing and marked as filed as well. So this could be across the quarterly updates, the end of year updates, and the final declarations as well. So it just means that if you've got, I always think about payroll, and Kevin, you'll get here, like when you had those kind of sole directors that you'd have to do the same thing for over and over again. When payroll products started to release this kind of bulk way of doing that for the standard salary, this feels like very much a similar sort of thing for MTD. On top of that as well, you can now set permissions per client on FreeAgent. So you can give control to what that individual client sees on their tax timeline. So it feels like really practical and like things that firms actually need. So it is helping with that MTD rollout, giving them kind of that efficiency in the admin that we all know that this is going to take up so much time. We're now having to do 5 times that much work. So if you can send out a bulk of 200 emails as opposed to trying to go into each client individually, it's great to see.
Yeah. I would agree with you wholeheartedly, Billie, because I think that they've done a really good job of not doing the flashy stuff, but tackling things that we know are just a challenge on a practical level. And they're not, they are pushing tech narratives in terms of like AI and looking at where they can automate. They've worked really hard to keep their focused edge, as always, on the core workflow and things that are super practical.
Yeah, I agree. It's grounded, isn't it? It's not always like, let's throw something shiny for everybody to look at. It's like, let's be super practical and just where we know that our clients need us, which is, I really like FreeAgent for that.
Yeah, and I think they're defensible in the sense that, we know that they're part of RBS, that we know that they've got the kind of side to them that says it's linked to the bank account. There's some really good things in there about like where you can go from as a small client right the way through to something that they're handling much more complex in the mid-tier as well. So quite excited to see how they continue to evolve, to be honest. They feel altogether much more practical and comforting.
I was going to say sharper. That's a bit
Time, brilliant. We've got something from GoCardless this week, and I'm very, very intrigued to get your perspective on this because the profitability gains seem to be an emerging pattern across fintech, and GoCardless cut 90 jobs, taking their headcount down from roughly 760 to 600 in 2 years. And we knew that might happen as part of the acquisition anyway, because it's just a cost reset and a truing up. But revenue is up to 155 million and losses are narrowing. So they're targeting EBITDA positive in 2026, which is super sensible. But I think the trend that I would like to kind of talk about is the proactive redundancies that we're seeing. Something feels a little bit different, and it's not layoffs because things are broken, but instead layoffs because AI is good enough and we can use fewer people, intelligent tools. We saw that with Jack Dorsey. I think that's what he said from Block, where they cut thousands, almost near 50% of the workforce. And we saw it with Klarna, who also aggressively reduced their headcount, but then I think recently have quietly started hiring back when the reality hit, because, there's some things that were slightly uncomfortable. Tickets were increasing and developers didn't want to do the customer success work. But where it gets interesting, I think, is GoCardless is shifting operations offshore as well, and they're reducing their UK cost exposure. It's really, for someone that's sort of very patriotic, I sort of feel that like discomfort of helping a great British business grow only for it to then take its operations offshore and clean up the P&L and reduce it, and rely more on technologies that are not also UK technologies, as AI and underpinning it. So it's like an uncomfortable truth right now where the AI replaces the people, but also we're just seeing a lot more in terms of things moving offshore. So I'm quite keen to hear your perspective on it, because I end that on a very negative note. And I think, although I don't want to say it's the end of jobs, I think it does feel like maybe it's the end of bad cost discipline and being able to now take a hacksaw to all of our operations in the same way and figuring out where the true human value lies.
Firstly, never nice to hear about people, losing their jobs. Like that's not straightforward, and without understanding why and the pressures that are on some of the businesses and I guess the triggers for these decisions. we have seen a lot, right? Like we've seen a lot kind of talk about the reason for these redundancies are AI. I just kind of think, well, it did not end up with a sum zero outcome. Like you've basically just removed all these people that you could actually educate and train and develop, which is kind of, I guess, your duty of care as an employer, because of AI. And then you bring in AI and that covers the gap that you've had with all these people, and then you end up with a different shape in your business. And I don't know if it's maybe some people, whether it's investors or boards, are looking at it saying, let's take the headcount cost out of the P&L, but the cost will move somewhere else. Like credits are expensive, right? Like that's the reality of it. Like it's kind of, it feels like a zero game. GoCardless sounds quite different. Obviously, they're moving operations offshore. That's a different conversation. They could look at it like, but this is the right move to ensure sustainability and sustainable growth over the next few years. And you kind of have to say, yeah, sometimes that just needs to be done.
Yeah, maybe. I think short term, like you said, it's a leaner team. There's offshore expansion and there's AI layered into its operation.
Yeah.
Fine. But the medium term is a question that I have is like, it's the cracks. It's the cracks in the service delivery. It's rehiring maybe some of the critical roles, which you don't, when you look at something like this, you're like, okay, that's not known until things start to fail. Maybe a reset on things that need to be automated. We did see that with Klarna. They kind of did away with a load of their CS, and then suddenly they're like, actually, we need to hire them back because we don't have anyone to handle this, and developers don't want to handle that, and the technology can't handle that. So there's a gap. But I think you're right, Kevin. There's an opportunity missed there on education. And I really liked, I heard recently from Bryony at Unleashed, and she was talking about Access Group and more just in general chit chat, catch up. She was saying that what Access Group had said was embrace this. And what they encouraged every single member of their team to do was to build something. They didn't care what, but it had to be for the good of their job, their operation, what was their day to day. And she said that she built something where, that annoying request that you always get. It's like, have you got a logo for this and the slides? And, the same annoying thing that throws you off. And you're like, okay, I'll put it in the shared drive and everyone should know where it is. I've shared these templates a million times. So she built an agent that just handled that request, that then said, okay, well, match that so that, you've got your request met. Super simple, but it was very clever. And this was her building this for herself. And that's the sort of stance that I really like, that Access Group were encouraging all of their portfolio companies and all of their employees to do that.
Yeah, I think you have to. Like it's, you heard me say this before, Indeed, like we rolled out educational courses, effectively like put your L plates on, like you're about to get like the basics of AI, and then facilitating people and, encouraging it. And we've got AI channels and tips and projects that run, and everyone's encouraged to share, not to show off and be like, look at this great agent I built, but like actually show and tell, like show people what you've done. Because I think the standard and the average across the industry and maybe across all employees is everybody's still got their L plates on. So why would you fire people to be like, oh yeah, we're going to be AI? It's like, well, really the better route is teach them.
IKEA did something where they got rid of a lot of their customer service facing roles because of AI. And what they did was, instead of actually making anyone redundant, they retrained them into being interior designers because they knew the products and the company so well. And as Indi said, like how much it costs to not just recruit somebody, but to retrain them with the knowledge that people have, having had years of experience in business. They was like, right, well, they're really well positioned to do this. So they just retrained them into a different part of the business. And what's really interesting about the GoCardless story is not AI is not actually mentioned in a lot of the things that I've read about it, but it's assumed to be the undercurrent. I think we are seeing this pressure now for businesses to cut costs, and it seems to be profitability is more important than any sort of growth. And to be more profitable, I think everybody is thinking AI is the answer. So people are just assuming that's the route. And it, there's so many, it's such a can of worms to open in that sense. So I think that kind of retraining and maybe reframing people's stance on it as well, that it isn't, as much as I'm like the number one fan, like it isn't the answer. And there's a lot more human answers that we could get great results from.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for listening into this episode. And big thanks to Billie, big thanks to Kevin for joining us on today's episode. If you liked what you heard, make sure that you subscribe, make sure that you keep in touch with us on our socials as well. We're posting every single day, and we're making sure that you've got a handful of really interesting events that are coming up in our line of sight. So we've got the awards that are later this year, but we're also looking to hold our very first hackathon, which will be coming. And so there'll be some details that we'll share on that. But if you're interested and you want us to keep in touch, then follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to the podcast, sign up to our email newsletter, do all the necessary, and we will catch you on the next one.